Started my first startup in '97. The world told me I was insane.
Our goal is creating future economies that are more regenerative and sustainable.
Something didn't match up. Why hasn't this become the next big thing? And that's where we invested.
The whole purpose of achieving anything in life is measurement.
Welcome, Shadow Ventures Summit 2021 attendees. You're in the managed track. As you know, we have a couple different tracks, and so today in this session, we're talking about the future of work. And so the future of work, as everyone knows, more so related to office hybrid work solutions. We have a group from Walter P. Moore, a close partner of Shadow, exploring this topic in depth and offering some concrete examples of how they've been able to adjust to a hybrid work environment. So the panel, just more specifically, will explore the future of work through the lenses of workspace, workforce, and technology. They will explore best practices and options, important considerations, findings, strategic and tactical recommendations for each of those three domains. Mission critical technology components needed for successful performance in hybrid remote work environments will also be discussed. So with that, I want to introduce Jim Jacobi, Michelle Perry, and Lauri Lampson. I will kick it over to Michelle, who's moderating the panel today. We're super excited to have all of you join us to speak today. Thank you for taking time. And I will be an avid listener in this discussion because I know this is kind of a critical thing in our space right now. So Michelle, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you for that great welcome. Hello, everyone. We are so excited to share our journey today to becoming a hybrid remote firm, or HRF. And we have lots of good things to share with you today. And we do believe this will be a strategic advantage to us and want to share the lessons we've learned as a part of our journey in getting there. Next. So today we'll do some quick intros. We will discuss why HRF, what was the context that led us to that decision. And then we will share the considerations, the strategies, the lessons that we've learned thus far. And then any time left over, we will certainly take Q&A. Next. So here's our group today that will be speaking. We have Lauri Lampson, who is the president and CEO of PDR. They have been a really great partner vendor firm with us as we have been exploring HRF. Jim Jacobi, who's the Chief Information Officer of Walter P. Moore. And then myself, I'm Michelle Perry. I'm the Chief HR Officer at Walter P. Moore. Next. So just a little bit about the companies that we are coming from. So Walter P. Moore is an international company of engineers, innovators, and creative people who solve some of the world's most complex structural, infrastructural, and technology challenges. Next. And then PDR is a Texas-based firm, but they have clients around the world. They are a multidisciplinary strategy and solutions firm. They have deep roots in workplace strategy and design and create places and experiences for people to be their best. Next. And then we have Walter P. Moore Technology, and that is our consulting and practice area with technology. And they serve AEC firms who value technology as an integral part of their business. Walter P. Moore Technology provides managed services, cybersecurity assessments, and custom software solutions. Next. So we're going to get into why HRF. What was the genesis that even had us thinking about moving in that direction? Next. So I'm sure all of you have been getting constant pings of articles about the future of work. It's in the news continually. This is just one example from the Society of Human Resource Management, or SHRM. So, what does that future of work look like post-COVID? And so some of the things they were mentioning that we also believe, flexible work schedules we think are here to stay. People have now had a taste of how that works, and they don't want to go back to the way things were before. Having less travel, being able to do things virtually, whether it's collaborating, getting work done, leveraging the technology to be able to do that well. and to be able to manage people on results and outcomes and data versus having to sit across from them live in the office every day. Next. So just a little bit about where we started and where we're going. So originally, before COVID, we were a pretty traditional company, probably 95% in office work. And then COVID hit and turned the whole world on its ear. In March of 2020, we made the decision to go fully 100% remote and had to do that pretty quickly. So it was a little scary to make a pivot that drastic, but we did that successfully. And since then are now planning for the future of hybrid remote, of taking the best of both of those worlds. So still working in the office, still doing it virtually, and having that good blend. Next. So we're looking at it as, we've always said we're going to work, as work being somewhere to go. But we're viewing it as work is something that we do, not a particular place you have to go. Next. So also to give context, because different companies use the term hybrid remote differently. Some companies do it that this group or department, this group is remote, this group is in the office. We are instead, our definition is every employee will have some blend of in-office and remote home office work, and that'll be figured out, within each group. And when they are in the office, we're going to have a variety of spaces, and it'll be based on activity-based work. So what are you doing? What type of space will be most conducive to that? It will be unassigned spaces, and we'll have different varieties. And Lauri's going to share a little bit more about that further on in the presentation. Next. So as mentioned, we have been going through this, looking through the three main lenses of workforce, of course, our people, workspace, so whether that's the spaces in the office or their home office space, and then technology, which is really the bridge between the two, and you need that to be able to make it effective. Next. So we'll get into now the why HRF, and we're going to look through it again through those three lenses of how we got to this decision. Next. So in terms of workforce, there were a couple of key drivers for us. So we do have an employee engagement survey that we do approximately annually. And for the past several surveys, so even before COVID, one of the lowest, well, it was the lowest scored item was work-life balance. And this was employees really struggling to find that right flexibility and balance of integrating work and life. I mean, who doesn't struggle with that? And since we do pride ourselves on being providing a great, extraordinary employee experience, this was a puzzle we were trying to solve and figure out how best to do that. We believe if you provide the employees a great experience, they in turn are going to provide our clients with an extraordinary experience. As we got into the pandemic and went 100% remote, we did a pulse survey, and we also continued to do a couple here over the months to continue to see how people felt about remote work. How you doing? Are you doing okay? Do you have what you need? And oh, by the way, once we get back to normal, how many days do you think you'd like to work in the office versus remote? We were actually a little surprised that it has stayed very consistent throughout, and it's been 85 to 90% of employees want to spend 3 days or less in the office. And every time we've done it, it's been very consistent in that output. And throughout the pandemic, we've proven it works. You can do it remotely. And as our CEO likes to say, you should never let a good crisis go to waste. And so in learning that this does work, we never would have been in this place without COVID. So I guess there's one positive. We were throwing around things like 980s and summer hours. How do we give people flexibility? And, we did it 100% remote. So we definitely pushed the bar much higher than we probably would have done originally in moving towards hybrid remote. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Lauri, and she's going to share it through the lens of workspace.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. Okay, we can go to the next slide, Jim. So why HRF from a workspace, workplace perspective? I spent a lot of time working with leaders, helping them figure out what their future looks like. And most of those conversations have revolved around just how uncertain the future is. So what I like to say is, while the future may be uncertain, we do know two things. We know that we aren't going to go back to the way things were in 2019. Even for those of us that prefer the simpler times of work just happens in the office and we manage people by their presence, it would be a lost opportunity not to leverage into everything that we have learned about people and how they work. So we will move forward. So how? The other thing we know is we will always have team members that are working remotely, whether they don't even live near one of the offices in our organizations or aren't able to get to the office. So if you believe those two things, next, Jim, then you need a strategy and a solution that will work for you. And that's really the key, is that it will work for you and your organization. And in thinking about that, there's some things to consider. You've got to balance individual preference, what people want, with what the business needs. So the work's got to get done in a certain way. You want to accommodate flexibility, perhaps. But you also have to think about what you can operationalize, because everything just got more complex. How to deliver and manage the spaces and the places that people need to do their work is much more complex. Then on top of that, it certainly has a real estate impact. So you want to optimize your real estate portfolio because you just want just what you need, and you need it to be the right stuff. You don't want to invest in more than you need, but you also want it to be add value to your business. You want it to actually help people do what they do and impact your business performance. And sometimes that might mean reconsidering what your initial thinking was in terms of how to invest in the portfolio. Or in some cases, the buzz right now is how much can we shrink it if we pursue hybrid remote. And the real end game is having the right amount, not necessarily just saving dollars on the real estate side. And then the third thing to think about is you want to mitigate risk. And so you want to make sure you're eliminating performance detractors and really enhancing the things that contribute to your performance. So very strategic decision. Next, Jim. So what I like to tell leaders, because there's a lot of pressure on leaders to make decisions, to declare, what are we going to do? And employees want to know what their fate is. We all like to get out of this uncertain time. And just a word of caution is just be really clear on what your intentions are, because what people need to know is why this is the decision, what's behind it, what is driving it. We've all seen, in the news, leaders declaring their solutions and then having to walk it back, either because the world changed again, which will continue to happen, or employees pushed back. So leaders have to declare, that's our job, but being really clear on what your intention is when you make that declaration, which means you need to understand your own intention. And then, because what you need to do is set a new context for decision making. If you intend for the future of how you do your work and how people work together to be different than it was in 2019, people need to know that, so that when you ask them that question, how often would you prefer to be in the office, they understand it from the context you intend to create, what the future you intend to create, not the place that they came from. Otherwise, they just have the perspective of where they came from, and so what that place is and what the policies were. And then what you're going to hear us talk about a lot today is solving for people first, putting people at the center of every single decision you make, not the math or the dollars of cost or savings, but really what people need. Again, we've learned so much about humans through this pandemic that we've been through. And then whatever you decide, call it an experiment, because we're going to be wrong. We don't actually know what is going to work best for our organizations. If our organizations are evolving and the world is evolving and people have evolved, then we need to try something and assess it, evaluate it, assess it, iterate, and evolve it. And so that gives leaders an out to say, we're just going to try something. Pilot, we use the word pilot a lot. And then, of course, seek perspective. And that's, it's very important, I think, to get some outside perspective, find a trusted partner that will help you sort through all the information out there and also bring you a process to help you go on this journey with you. Next, Jim. So now that you kind of understand, like, what are you dealing with? What do you need to be thinking about? Where are the decision points? So I said everything got more complex. There's really, the way we think about it, you need to be able to answer the questions in kind of 5 key arenas. And the first is really, what is the role of place in your culture? Do you need an office to enhance your culture? What is the purpose of having a workplace? And let's start there, because that should help start to define the root of the strategy and the solution. And then there are some big decisions or information that you need to understand. You really need to understand just how dynamic is the work, different types of work in your organization. And is that changing? Does the future look different than the past in terms of how the work is done? And then, are you all in on accommodating work from anywhere? Is that something you want to consider? That's a big question, because that opens or closes up options in what your solution and strategy could be. And could your people share seats and spaces? That's a big one. I just had a conversation this morning. A client wants not to share, but they want flexibility. Well, too much space is as bad as not enough space. So it's really something that you need to think about. And then, how confident are you in your future? How much flexibility do you need to your strategy and solution to evolve with you as your business continues to change? So to answer those questions, next slide, you need good information. So we think data is very important to helping you either validate your assumptions, because we're making a lot of assumptions about what we think will work, but also inform our decisions. And ideally, you're going to capture data from a variety of sources so that you can triangulate what perception and sentiment, what do your people think, and what are they doing, behavior, how are you actually using space, or what are people actually doing, and then how are you measuring success in the business. And all of those together should help guide you as you start to chip away at all the decisions necessary to create a new strategy and solution for your workplace. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jim so he can give us some insight into how technology impacts the hybrid remote firm approach.
Thank you, Lauri, and welcome all. So when I thought about asking or answering the question, why HRF from a technology lens, the answer was pretty simple. Fundamentally, it's because the technology stack that we use to support remote access for the workforce has been very reliable. It has been very resilient. Chart on the left-hand side, in the early days of our work from home, we went from everybody essentially working from the office to everybody working from home over the course of a weekend. That happened on March 13th of 2020. That's a day I finally remember. And while we had the primary remote access pathways in place, and for us, those are virtual private network, VPN, which is kind of like the blue line. You can see the access number of people accessing VPN on a weekly basis. We have virtual desktop interface, which is the orange line. We've got a private farm of about 200 VDIs in our technology stack. And then finally, remote desktop, which is kind of shown at the bottom in green. So while all of these access pathways existed prior to COVID and prior to work from home, I don't think we would have ever imagined this grand experiment to say, hey, this is Friday, next Monday, let's have everybody work from home and see how that works out. Probably not going to happen, but we, like everyone else, were forced into it and discovered that the technology was sound, it was effective, it was resilient. We could continue to work from home, support our clients, give them the kind of service they've become accustomed to. And while we are carrying on business, we are supporting the flexible work-life balance that Michelle has mentioned. So we're becoming more accommodating and attractive to staff as an employer because of this HRF environment, and our technology has worked out just fine. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle. We're going to talk a little bit about consideration and strategies for HRF from the perspective of these three lenses: workforce, workplace, and technology. Michelle?
Thanks, Jim. Well, we're going to go ahead and continue peeling back that onion of HRF. Next slide. So for the workplace or the workforce considerations, here are the key things I would point out. Really focused on communication. Whatever you think you need to do in terms of volume, you probably should multiply that times 5. I'll never forget, I was in a session about communication, and the speaker was talking about that people need to hear something 13 times until it truly sinks in. So think about it. We usually communicate it once, twice, and we think people will just get it. So use multiple forums, whether it's the traditional email, whether it's posts on Teams. We did some leadership forums. We did all hands meetings. We did wrap sessions where people could come and ask anything they wanted and we would answer it. Make sure you get opinions. We've learned along the way that it's important to understand what people are thinking, what their desires are. Again, it doesn't mean it's a consensus decision, but getting that input is important. Building your coalition. So think about the people that have influence in your organization. And it should be people outside the leadership group. You know, if you are the informal leaders that people look to, bring them under the tent early, make sure they understand and are on board, and they can help be your disciples as you roll out the message. And why culture has absolutely nothing to do with the building. The building is one piece of it. It's people did struggle, especially managers, with dealing with how do we continue the culture? How do we connect? Of course, you can absolutely do it virtually. You can do it hybrid. You can do it in person, but figuring out how best to do that. And so providing them some good explanation on what's expected for them, giving them training, giving them support are key. Being empathetic, and I guess I should also say patient. You will get many of the same questions over and over. You will have people trying to wrap their brains around it. So being able to understand where they're coming from and provide support is key. Getting expert input outside is also good to get other perspectives and to help you make good decisions. And then I'd say probably the biggest one is don't underestimate the amount of change management required for this kind of change. And next slide, we'll talk about that a little more. Next slide. So this is the change curve. As you see there, change is hard. So this is actually based on the work of Dr. Kubler-Ross, and her work was actually in grief. And you probably think, what the heck does grief have anything to do with change? Well, if you think about it, any change, you're losing something that you're accustomed to. So even if it's a happy change, there's something that you're giving up. So think about any time you've moved. You're excited to go, but you may be losing good neighbors or your child's favorite teacher or your favorite hangout or restaurant. You eventually get all that and get it all figured out in the new location, but there's that sense of loss as you're doing that. So same thing with a change such as this. And we found, especially with managers who most of their career have had the old traditional way of working in the office, this is a lot to wrap your brain around. So it usually starts with shock. What? Well, what are you talking about? What are we going to do? Then you'll get some denial and all the different ways of why something won't work. Then you get frustration. You've made my job harder. How am I going to get this figured out? And then they just get exhausted. You're not listening. You're making this change. It's hard. But then you move up to I'm going to start trying it out. Maybe there's something to this, to at least dipping one toe in and committing to finally full commitment. So everybody goes through this. It's a natural part of change, just understanding where people are and helping them through this, because you don't want people to get stuck in that depression or valley of despair, as it's called. You want to keep moving them in a positive direction. And now I will turn it over to Lauri for the workspace.
Okay, go ahead and go to the next slide. Just a little bit. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the engagement process with Walter P. Moore, and then how we ended up at the solution, strategy and solution. When Walter P. Moore, when the CEO came to me, he was really clear on the intention to go to this hybrid remote strategy, but wasn't entirely clear exactly what that meant. What would the exact strategy and solution? How was that going to work? So sought out help, and knew that the solution needed to be very specific to their business model. And you'll see some very specific things that led to the strategy here that, as Michelle said, become a strategic advantage for the firm, and was willing to invest and spend the time internally and with a strategic partner. So Walter P. Moore is a really great collaborative client and strategic partner throughout this process. And I think that is really key to getting where you want to get in terms of a solution. So you heard Michelle mention 100% of the organization was involved in the process in some way, shape, or form. We started with engaging the hybrid remote firm executive team. So these are the leaders that sort of set the direction, identified the why we're doing it and what we needed to do for the organization. And from there, we looked into the organization's current state, and we did a current state assessment of both the organization, the business, what does it look like, what does the work look like, and the real estate portfolio. So Walter P. Moore has 700 people in 25 locations across the world. So this strategy will have a big impact. And as Michelle said, lots of employee polls, and then we did a culture survey to just kind of make sure we understood where people were. We then leveraged the Leisman Home Working Survey, and this gave us two important data points. One, it gave us insight into how well the home was working. Since the home was going to be a key workspace in the solution, we needed to understand how well it was working at supporting the work tasks that people were doing. It also gave us insight into the complexity of work tasks. And so what we've learned about hybrid remote or very agile environments is the more complex the work is, the more successful these activity-based working environments are. The simpler the work or the tasks are, the less successful they are. So that's important. It's important to know that going in. Then we engage the leaders, as Michelle said in the early slides, that really need to understand managers and what they see as an opportunity in the solution, but also what their concerns are. And we had hosted several focus groups and workshops, as Michelle said, to be part of that 13-point touch to help people understand and make sure they were part of the process. Okay, Jim, next slide. And so through all of that engagement and data gathering and shaping that into information, we came up with a recommendation based on all of that. What is the business trying to achieve? What is the strategic direction? What do people prefer? And what can we operationalize? And so we came up with these 4 guiding principles that the office needs to do for Walter P. Moore. So the office, even in a hybrid remote, it is still a very important piece of the strategy for bringing people together and getting work done. So one key principle is connection. The office needs to enhance the connection to Walter P. Moore and to the brand and be a hub that helps showcase who they are and what they do. That's very important. It's also the physical presence. So in all the locations where they do business. So it's important to have that, flag in the ground. The second key guiding principle is around learning and just how people learn and get together and collaborate from a mentoring and career growth standpoint. And so the office is there to augment what happens in the virtual world and host those kinds of interactions that are best done in person. The third is obviously tools. The office is the place where you can have certain tools or equipment or access to resources that aren't available in the home office. So it's a hub for information. And then flexibility was a key principle. While we were going to have these fixed offices, they needed to be very flexible to accommodate work as it changes and the organization as it changes. So layers of flexibility. So with that strategy in mind, Jim, we can go to the next slide. That led to, those principles led to a space use strategy that was based on activity-based working. So I mentioned that earlier. This means individuals choose from a variety of options where and when they work and what tools they need to do that. And that is in the office and virtually. And the in the office means we need a variety of places and they need to accommodate different kinds of work. So in this strategy, the spaces are unassigned. You use them, you reserve them as you need them. And we based our planning on a strategy of an average daily occupancy of less than 50%. So you heard Michelle say most people want to spend 3 or less days in the office. So at any given time, the population of that office, less than 50% would be showing up. Go ahead, Jim. And here you can see when we captured data, Michelle talked about the data that we captured multiple times, that validated that could be our planning basis. So remember I said just the right amount of space and the right kind of space. This is helping guide that decision. Okay, next slide. And then as part of your strategy for your workplace, the site, where it is very important. That plays into the supporting your strategy. So for Walter P. Moore, 3 key things came up to be critical criteria when evaluating site and building options. And that's the experience that we're creating for our people, because the place is the entire environment where you're coming, that it contribute to human well-being, human sustainability, we call it. So wellness, there's a health aspect, and that it offer resilience, meaning there are flexibility options, so we can ebb and flow and flex inside the decision. So every location decision would be evaluated against the program requirements, how much and what kind of space, but also around the environment that the location and the building offers. Next slide. So from a planning standpoint, we take those guiding principles, what we need the office to do for us, and we break that down into what are the key zones that we need in the workplace to support our strategy. So, of course, we need a hub zone. We need a centralized, high energy, the heart of the office zone where people come to collaborate, socialize, work, gather, have events and meetings. And so that space encompasses several of our principles and really becomes the heartbeat of the office. Then because people are coming to work, we need a team zone, team that is based on group collaboration and is super flexible so that the teams can define how they use the space, and they can change the space over time as how they work together needs to change. And those need to be, somewhat adjacent to each other. That equipment I talked about, that's that service center zone. And that provides the services, the equipment, the resources and materials. And you want that to be near but separate from the team zone so that it doesn't interrupt that flexibility. And then it's important in these new agile activity-based work environments that there's actually a quiet zone. Some people are going to be coming to the office to focus. So we all know that everybody's home office setting is not equal or necessarily conducive to focus work. And so we need to provide that in the office. So that is a big change compared to where Walter P. Moore is coming from today. And there is a technology layer on top of that you're going to need to support that. So back to Jim to help us out with the technology.
Thank you, Lauri. And let's talk about important consideration or strategies from a technology perspective for hybrid remote firms. So I've got a list of 5 things that I'm going to comment on. I'm calling them table stakes for any firm participating in an HRF plan. When you look through this list, you may be thinking to yourself, you should be thinking to yourself, hey, these are all pretty good ideas. But they become critically important when a great deal of your workforce is continuously working remotely. So I have a few comments on reliable computing at distance, file management vis-a-vis a cloud-first strategy, collaboration tools, next generation, which is critically important to HRF. I want to talk a little bit about being responsive on the technical support side from the IT organization, whether you're at home or in the office. And then I'll close out with some comments about cybersecurity, which is a clear and present danger still and will be for the foreseeable future. So talk a little bit about reliable computing at distance. I've showed this chart before. And the point that I want to make is that it's really important to map your remote access pathways to the technology stack that you're using. This is not an area where a one-size-fits-all approach will work. We know within our own firm, for example, that there are certain pieces of technology that require the data to be immediately adjacent to the processing power, and thus the virtual desktop enterprise that have been established. Now, we do this from a private cloud perspective, so we run our own VDIs, but we put some of our managed service clients into third-party VDIs in an example, and it provides very effective access. It's not required for all technology, but there are certain pieces that need to be mapped there. VPN is another access pathway that probably all of you are using. Works well for some things, not so good for others. Typically, large file access at distance via VPN is not a good solution. There's also just basic home internet services with cloud systems like Microsoft Office 365. So you need to do some work in preparing your staff, giving them some minimum criteria for home internet provisioning, and also working with your staff to understand their technology stack so that they have the right pathway that is existing. And we've been able to do this both internally and externally with a large measure of success, which builds confidence that over the long haul, the concept of having part of your cohort working remotely from home, part of your cohort working in the office is a very feasible approach. In terms of the software pieces, I'm going to share here with you some of the bits that we're using. I'm not going to talk about all these in depth, but we do have a desk reservation system in place as staff come in to reserve their unassigned workstations. Microsoft Teams is our primary collaboration platform, probably is for many of you. That's a cloud-based infrastructure, and it's been working very effectively for us. No real issues that we've experienced for people accessing that over their home internet. We also use Zoom for certain online virtual events where the functionality of Zoom maybe provides a little bit more than what we're looking for in Teams. One of the things I wanted to mention was Mural, which is kind of a whiteboard on steroids, so to speak. It's an incredibly effective collaboration tool, especially when you've got people who are collaborating from different areas. And we've been very happy with that. It's another cloud-based solution. We're big into Autodesk, obviously. Walter P. Morris, as are many of our managed services clients. That's been an effective solution, just accessing via home internet. And then we're also working with Panzura and Microsoft Azure Files from a cloud-based file storage system. The other thing I'll mention, I'm going to talk a little bit more about, is IoT sensors that we're using to help us manage the new space that is rolling out in our HRF floor plans. Collaboration, mission critical. So we are recommending next generation collaboration tools, and the components we're using are largely Microsoft Teams rooms or compatible with Microsoft Teams. And our goal is to provide a seamless collaboration experience between people in the office and people working from home. So we've got a couple of different solutions shown in the pictures here. We're using the Microsoft Portable Hub, which is shown lower right, and also large touch screens in conference rooms that provide the ability for people to get a view of everyone visually participating in the meeting. A little bit about technology in the office. Here are the components that we're laying down on the workstations. Double monitors, docking stations, web cameras, excuse me, personal keyboard and mice. So apologize for my cough. But here's a little frame of the density IoT sensors we're using to capture activity in our office. These are anonymous sensors, infrared, but they pick up activity that you can actually map down to individual seats. It comes equipped with analytics that's going to let us evaluate space use management moving forward. We're also providing employees with this technology kit for their home office. You can see that it's similar in content to what's being laid down at their office. So the objective here is for people to move between their home and their office in a plug and play type of environment. One of the important considerations is responsive technical support from an IT standpoint. We now have over 700 offices to support when you consider everybody working from home. So in order to do that effectively, we've got to be very quick in responding to IT issues. So we've been focusing on developing robust knowledge bases, deploying virtual agents or bots on the help desk to promote user self-service at a high level. And we're spending a lot of time monitoring trends, service level agreements, and response performance. We're doing this both internally and for our external managed service customers. Critically important to be able to, for staff, to be able to get immediate assistance. Then finally on cyber, what has changed? Well, not a lot from the threat actor perspective. We're still seeing the same threat actors: ransomware, phishing, spear phishing, compromised business email. All of those actors are still out there. What's what's changed is we have people working from home now, so they are not protected by the firewall. And for that reason, it's critically important to have a very strong defense in depth program from a cybersecurity perspective, because your workforce is in a different environment when they're working from home. So what we recommend, and we're doing this internally and also to our external clients, is that you have got to focus on a strong defense in depth program, which involves the phases shown in the diagram: prevention, detection, response, restoration, and then encapsulating lessons learned. We know that most companies in the AEC industry and probably elsewhere have been focused on the prevention phase, which is on the left-hand side of the screen. So a lot of people doing, backups, phishing testing, MFA, patching, that's been the traditional focus area. But in the new environment, it is equally, if not more important, to have a strong detection process where you are actively monitoring what's going on within your network and your domain. I can't overemphasize the importance of that detection phase, because the threat actors, if they are intent on penetrating your environment, will get in. You need to be able to pick them up early while they're in reconnaissance phase before they do any damage. And then from the response phase, what we recommend is that firms have a bona fide vetted incident response plan, which covers the entire gamut of how you're going to respond to a cyber event. And that plan is also vetted with your cyber insurance folks, because when it's time to respond, you need to be prepared in advance and to be following a well thought out, well designed script. So when it comes to HRF, cybersecurity, a lot of focus pre-HRF, but because we've got people in a more exposed environment now, you've got to string these four phases together. And then finally, I can't ever talk about cybersecurity without giving a pitch to remind people to do backup and practice your restoration practices. The threats are out there. If the bad guys want to target you, they're going to get in. So you need to be prepared to quickly restore your data and not be reliant on some third party or a threat actor paying ransom to give you a decryption key. So this is probably one of the most important things you can do for your firms, is to make sure you're backed up appropriately. Okay. I'm going to pitch it to Lauri, thankfully, so I can stop talking.
Oh, I'm so sorry. So before we roll video.
Sorry,
yeah,
before I do, I was going to ask people, if you haven't done it already, to submit some questions in our chat panel, because right after Lauri takes us through our reimagined Washington, D.C. office space, we're going to go to Q&A. So Lauri, over to you.
Okay. So what does all this look like? Well, this is the punchline. All of this work and all of this thinking results in an actual solution. And as Jim said, this is a video fly through of a initial design for their DC office. So you can see as you walk in that the hub zone that I mentioned is right at the front door. So it makes a big impact, a big impression right off the bat. So this is the buzz zone, the heart and energy of the office. You're immediately greeted with Walter P. Moore's brand, and it shows up in screen, in logo, in signage, but it also shows up in the design. So you can see the ceiling is made up of triangular shapes, which are part of the Walter P. Moore logo. You can see the color in the design is red. That's bringing that logo in. And in terms of the culture of the organization, that green wall that's in the center, that is showcasing Walter P. Moore's commitment to sustainability and health and wellness. So lots of elements are coming together here to give you that initial impression. And again, we said the hub is to connect people, both your employees of Walter P. Moore and also visitors and clients that might be coming into the organization immediately. It's multi-purpose space, so that lots of different things can happen there. Now we're entering the team zone. So remember the team zone, this is where the teams come to collaborate. So there's places to touch down and work in small groups. You can see the technology as we go through the space. What's one of the most important things about the team zone is flexibility. So you'll notice that the architectural walls that are making up the meeting spaces are actually furniture walls or demountable, meaning that Walter P. Moore could actually move them around or take them with them if they relocate from this office. So that's a really good strategy if you're making changes for the short term. You can do it in such a way that your investment is not lost. It can be leveraged going forward. So you can see the technology. So technology is a big overlay in how the office works, as you heard Jim mention. There's technology access for the teams just about everywhere in that team zone. So now we're entering the quiet zone. So this zone is actually separated from the team zone so that when you're in this zone, you can work in the open, but in quiet. So these are for folks that want to come and focus, and they don't want to be sitting up at the front at the kitchen, in the buzz. So there's open spaces here, and then there's also closed spaces. So as we go down this corridor, you'll see that there are small rooms, phone rooms, or video rooms to have presentations like this. Now we're headed back towards the front of the office, but right here to our right, this is that service area, that service center area that I mentioned. So because it's got fixed architecture, fixed equipment, it's less flexible. We want to make sure that we keep it out of the way of that flexible team zone, but easily accessible to everybody that needs it in the office. I think we're going to go by might have a little view into a small 1 to 2 person focus room there on the left with the door. You'll also notice, so we talked about how, the office is a tool. It's also a destination. It needs to be compelling. There's a lot of thinking that goes into the design. And one of those things is the amount of transparency in glass. So we're letting natural light in. Okay, there you go. So we want to know what you think. What questions, we could roll it again, I guess. What questions do you have while Michelle's queuing up the questions? One thing we didn't say up here is just how multifunctional it is and how it can ebb and flow to accommodate individuals, small groups, even host events. This would be the party space if Walter P. Moore was hosting a big event right here at the front. Off to the left is where the coffee and food would be. So this is where teams would gather to have coffee or lunch together. So with that, that's how this whole hybrid remote concept strategy manifests into a design, and hopefully we'll have people in it soon.
All right, thank you, Lauri. We'll now go to Q&A. We've already got a couple questions, but if you do have a question, please go ahead and enter that in the Q&A pane. So first question is if we can share any details about the cost structure of HRF versus traditional in-office and if it's helping the bottom line. So I'll throw out a couple thoughts and then Lauri or Jim, you can certainly feel free to jump in. So one with hybrid remote, obviously there's an initial investment, some changing of some space, technology, those types of things. So short term, it's not a cost savings, but long term, there certainly is opportunity. The beauty of this is we certainly have a growth plan. What usually happens, you grow out of your space and you have to go get more space, bigger space. And that's one of a company's biggest expenditures is office space. And so we can accommodate growth in our current spaces. And that's by the lower densities. And you can adjust the densities and use the space that you have instead of instantly always having to get more real estate when your head count goes up. We're also exploring opportunities in some of our larger offices to sublease some of the space because we believe in the new format, we'll have too much space for what this hybrid remote will need. And so that's another cost savings opportunity for us. Lauri, Jim, other thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Michelle, that the short-term investment, but a long-term savings because reduced office footprint. And of course, we also expect additional productivity because our staff, this is something that, people really wanted after they've discovered it can be effective over the last year and a half. And so we see this as actually a recruiting advantage as well. And in some of the recent hires that we made during the interview process, interestingly enough, this is what they were asking about. Does Walter P. Moore, will I have to come into the office every day? Or what is your strategy?
Right.
So it was nice to be able to respond in a way that was attractive to them.
Right. I would just echo the impact on the bottom line and the top line, because we're interested in both, right? The hard dollars but also the productivity impact on performance. It really depends on where you're starting. So what has to change? And like Michelle said, the bigger offices, we know we can save real estate. Some of the smaller offices, we have to completely remodel them. So there's an initial cost, but they really are not, they don't need to be any smaller. They just need to be different than they are. So it really depends on your current condition and where you've already invested, particularly in technology. Your technology platforms really, if you don't already have reservation systems and a robust AV with acoustic properties, then that will be a new initial investment.
Thank you. All right, next question is experience with modifying parking benefits when employees are only at the office 1 to 3 days a week. So we have actually experienced that. Of course, in old world, you had a parking spot per employee, so very head count driven. We have moved to a parking pool concept. So based on expected densities, we have a dedicated pool of parking spaces. Then if we have an employee come in and we've exceeded that pool limit, they can still park. They would just pull a ticket and we reimburse them for it. So it really helped us reduce the large parking costs to be able to move to the pool concept. So I can say that's what we've experienced. But Lauri, have you seen any other thoughts on that area?
That is so the parking companies, we actually at our location in Houston, we had to talk to the parking contractor and help them understand, because we had canceled all of our parking because we weren't coming to the office, help them understand that we needed this concept of seat sharing for our cars. So it's exactly the same thing. They were a little behind in thinking about how to do the pool parking concept, but now some of them have got their systems up and running. So that's exactly what we do in our Houston office. A couple of our other offices are not quite as sophisticated, but and exactly the same thing. You can pull a ticket if it's full. If we have actually exceeded our average daily occupancy or parking, capacity, pull a ticket and we reimburse it. And we just try to manage that over time so that we reserve the right amount of seats or spots. Parking car spots. Same concept though. You don't want more spot. You don't want to pay for spots that you're not using.
Dillip just dropped an interesting point in chat that our carbon footprint, is dropped 60% because of lack of commute during COVID. But in HRF, he's predicting it would be higher than that, but still 30% less than 2019. So that's a very important benefit as well.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely good to be good corporate citizens and look at that aspect as well. Well, we're nearing the end of our time here. Is there any last question before we break? Nick, anything you need to say to the group to
yeah, well, mainly I wanted to say thank you all, Michelle, Lauri, Jim. This was fantastic. I think if anyone's listening and doesn't have a good idea of what a blueprint for a remote work environment looks like, a hybrid environment, they should attend the session because this was very, very informative and thorough. So thank you all so much for spending time.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's fun.
Great. So with that, I will direct everyone back. So in about 2 minutes, we're gonna meet at the main stage. We will be discussing the U.S. infrastructure bill in depth. So related to construction, development, technology spend, and some of the opportunities that have come up in terms of funding from the infrastructure bill related to our sector. We have quite a few renowned legal experts who are going to be kind of weighing in on that. That'll be at the main stage. And yeah, again, thank you all so much. Walter P. Moore, in general, we're honored to have the ability to partner with you all. And we look forward to bringing you back. We'll have to do this again sometime soon.
Great.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye all.